Hello, friends. Hey, Gaurav. Hello,
Hi,
John.
good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing? All good. We've got people coming in now, and we're going to give a few more minutes. Let me welcome them and see if they can hear me properly. Uh, Venkatesh ji, Pooja, Lara, Aditya, welcome, welcome. Welcome, Shikumar, welcome. Satyakumar, Shobna. Can you all can you all hear me well? If you can just say yes in the chat box, so I know that I'm audible. Okay, so yes, okay. Arijit says yes. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Shahidji. Thank you very much, and wonderful. So welcome, friends. We've got a stalwart here who knows mammals better than anybody else does, and then there's John, and this webinar is really is going to be my favorite one because it's the first time we're doing a webinar with him, and especially on mammals and mammals of the world. Let me quickly introduce John to you. I'll read out his introduction to you. Give me a minute. Okay. So Jon Hall decided he wanted to be a mammal watcher after spending a year in Zambia in 1991. He returned to the UK desperate to keep looking for wildlife, but realized bird watching wasn't his thing. He would be a mammal watcher. He has spent the past 33 years trying to build his mammal list and has now seen 2,300 species, 2,300 species in the wild. My God, that's a lot. More than a third of the world's mammals, and almost certainly more than anyone has ever seen. In 2005, he started a website, mammalwatching.com. I'm sure most of you have already visited his website because I posted that in the information emails. That was to share information in his trip reports. 20 years later, the site is the hub of global community of fellow mammal watchers and was recently featured in the New York Times. That's really commendable. That's fantastic. So a bit about me for the first timers here. I'm Mohit Aggarwal. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, an ecotourism specialist by training by GSTC. Asian Adventures is a 30-year-old company, and it's the largest bird watching company of India. I'm also curating a fair which will happen in October called Global Wildlife Fair, which will be the first one of its kind. And this will be an annual event in New Delhi. This is where we have a lot of mammals. So I wanted to curate this fair for conservation of wildlife, serious conservation of wildlife, and to bring stakeholders on a single platform for critically endangered species. There will be people from tourism as well to aid this fair, and then there will be researchers, youth, grassroots communities, and civil society, and this will become fairly big in due course, and it will also go across borders. So if you have time in October, please sign up for your visit or your exhibition at the Global Wildlife Fair in New Delhi. So that was a bit about me. Over to Gaurav. Gaurav, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks a lot. Namaste, everyone. My name is Gaurav Nalkur. I'm an avid bird watcher and avid wildlife lover. And my love for wildlife also began in Zambia, which is where I grew up, actually. And I'm also a strong believer in the fact that ecotourism, when used properly, can be a great tool to aid wildlife conservation as well. and create conservation awareness. And I'm qualified as a wildlife biologist, but I'm training to be an ecotourism specialist currently. And I'm lucky to be working with Mohit and Asian Adventures for the last few years, both of whom, share my passion for wildlife and my belief that ecotourism can be a great conservation tool.
Wonderful. So over to you, John, for your magic.
Thank you both very much. Really great introductions. Thank you, Mohit. Thank you, Gaurav. And this presentation will talk about my mammal watching journey, what mammal watching is all about, how it's changed. But more importantly, it will talk about the conservation side of this, which is increasingly the thing I'm most excited about. So all of these wonderful mammals on the title page have got something in common. And that is that when I started mammal watching, they were all extremely difficult animals to see, or so I thought. And yet there's a story now behind each of them, which we'll talk about, where really all of these now are very easy to see if you go to the right place and use the right techniques. So mammal watching has really changed. And the central kind of question I'll put to you, and I hope I'll convince you, is that right now, at this moment of history, we are living in the golden age of mammal watching. What do I mean by golden age? I mean that there has never been a point in time where all of us can potentially see so many of the world's mammals, because the world is so connected now. We have more money, there's more transport links, there's more knowledge, more information. It's safer and easier to get around than it's ever been for many of us. But also, looking at the way many species are heading, there probably never will be a moment when there are so many mammals left to see. So right now is the peak moment in history to be a mammal watcher. It's the golden age. So let's start by what is mammal watching. Well, 30 years ago, when I came back from Zambia, Gaurav, and I told the world I was a mammal watcher, I would be looked at with a mixture of concern and questioning, like, what on earth are you talking about? That's really changed. So I guess many of you on this call will already understand what mammal watching is. It's just like bird watching. We go out, we look for mammals. The rest of it, not birds, but the rest of it is the same. Lifeless community groups. We take out our binoculars, we watch and we listen for things, and we go to try and find them in the wild. It's as simple as that. But we are, I focus on mammals, not on birds. As I said, 30 years ago, no one knew what on earth I was talking about, but I was in Thailand less than 2 weeks ago, in a national park, and I met several groups of international visitors there who were all there as saying they were mammal watching. So it was really great to see this change that's come about fairly quickly. So let me just talk about my story. So, let me take you back to when I'm 5 years old. It's one of my earliest memories. I'm with my dad, and we're visiting the nearest town to where I grew up in the UK. He picks me up and he slowly pushes my head into the outstretched jaws of a hippopotamus, and I'm screaming with terror. Now, that was a stuffed hippopotamus. It was in the museum, but it's certainly one of the first things I remember. And it was a ritual we do where I'd be terrified, but he put me inside. And I think it all began there, to be honest. It began there. I began watching wildlife documentaries as a kid with David Attenborough and others. And then when I went to Zambia, I lived in Zambia for a year straight after university, all of this came flooding back. And it felt, looking at these animals I'd seen on television and looked at in books as a kid, it all came flooding back to me. And it was like I was living in color for the first time, if the rest of my life had been black and white. I was only there for a year, unfortunately. And when I went back to the UK, I was determined to stay connected to looking for wildlife, because I loved just going out and searching for things and finding them. And so I tried bird watching, because that's what everyone does in the UK. So imagine the contrast between being somewhere like Zambia's Luangwa Valley, seeing 5 or 6 leopards in the same night, coming back and then going out to a little bird reserve in the middle of winter near London with 200 people wandering around, talking into tape recorders about the pigeons and the seagulls they were looking at. That just wasn't, it wasn't going to cut it for me. So I thought, what can I do? that will bring back that magic of looking for things in Africa, but without these crowds of people, because that just isn't what it's about for me. And so I thought I'll become a mammal watcher. I'm going to look for mammals. There's lots of things to look for in the UK. And it really started there. So that was in 1992 when I went back to Britain. And then it took me, that love for animals has taken me around the world. It encouraged me to leave the UK. I moved to Australia for 7 wonderful years. And in Australia, when I was reluctantly leaving 20 years ago, I was so envious of the information birdwatchers had there. This is my guilty secret, even I was a birdwatcher in Australia, but only when there weren't any mammals to see. But birders had their books on where to find the birds of Australia. They had their websites. They had their email servers. They had so much information. And I spent 7 years, I saw maybe 250 different species of mammals in Australia, but it was all information I'd scraped from volunteering with academics, going out with PhD students, volunteering with national park rangers, and just asking people. That none of this was really written down anywhere. And so I created this website, mammalwatching.com, as a love letter to Australia, thinking, look, this is what I've found about this country that I call home. And I'd love for other people to go out and enjoy the mammals like I have. And it all started there. And very, very quickly, people started getting in touch with me. They started writing from around the world, sort of coming out saying, I'm a bird watcher, but I've always loved mammals. And I'm so glad there's someone else like me out there. And this community formed, and it's now turned into a community of several thousand people with thousands of trip reports on a website. This is what the website looked like back in the early days, but we've since rebuilt it, and it's now this community. It's a much slicker website, but it's really based around 2 things. It's based around places. So for every country almost in the world now, there's a country page with a list of reports of people who've been there, giving the sort of information that anyone else visiting might want to have if they want to go and look for mammals. And it's also built around a community where we interact, we ask questions about ID, we ask tips for where we can find guides, where to go, what animal is this, and so on. And it's growing. Every week there's a few new people sign up. And so it's a thriving community. We do reviews of gear. People, travel companies advertise now. People advertise trips, and so on and so on. There's also a set of league tables where people who've got mammal lists who want to sort of publish them somewhere can do that, not just for all mammals, but for primates, which is a very popular group, and for cats, and other groups of species. So it's trying to become like what many birdwatching sites already are. But it's not just a community around the website I started. There's very active communities now on Facebook. There really ought to be one for India. I don't know if there is one for South Asia, but perhaps someone there should set one up. But there's one in Australia with thousands of members, one in Europe, one in North America, one in Southeast Asia, and so on and so on. And they're thriving. So there's a lot of people out there who like to talk and photograph and go and see mammals. And all of this, of course, this growth and interest has created a lot of new information now, which is being shared. And I've always had a theory that there's a place to see every mammal species on the planet. We just, for a long time, didn't know where those places were for many things, but we're really finding them out very, very quickly now for things that I thought, 20 years ago, I would never see. And there's also now a lot of new equipment coming out and new techniques for finding things. Probably the biggest game changer in the last sort of eight years or so has been using thermal scopes, heat scopes. If you're not familiar with those, they're an optical device you look through and you see an image of the world that's mapped in infrared. And so if you see a living animal in this, it glows like a light bulb. It's actually easier to find animals at night or in the daytime through one of these when the temperature conditions are right than it is with the naked eye, because you scan the forest or the savannah and it's just grey, grey, grey. All of a sudden there's a yellow light bouncing in the middle of the screen, and that's an animal, or sometimes a bird, often a mammal. So these are a huge game changer. And I'll give you an example. I spent 7 years in Australia fanatically looking for animals, and a lot of those small marsupials in Australia, they don't have any eye shine if you go out at night, using a flashlight. They're small, they're high up in trees, very difficult to see. And let me see if it's on the next slide, or I may just go back. I'll go back. The animal on the right there is a pygmy possum. It's Australia. It's about 10 centimeters long, maybe. Lives in bushes and trees, eats pollen and nectar and so on. I never saw one of those running around wild. I caught them several times with researchers, but I never saw one in the forest, despite spending several thousand hours wandering around at night with my flashlight in the right kind of places. I was back a year ago. I went out for one evening with friends for like 3 hours in Victoria with my thermal scope, and we saw 4 of them. So it's a complete game changer for a lot of species, especially these smaller animals like pygmy possums. And then there's new techniques as well. So we're finding out ways to see animals that are difficult to see, especially the set of species that live underground, that spend most of their lives underground. On the left is one of the American pocket gophers. It's a fairly large rodent with an impressive set of teeth. You see their mounds everywhere when you're walking in the right habitat. They have big colonies, but they seldom come above the surface, and certainly not on command, or so we thought. So it was a matter of luck to bump into one. You maybe see the dirt flying out of the hole, and if you waited, you could catch a glimpse. But what we figured out now is that, and this is not just for the gophers, it's for the tuco-tucos in South America, it's for some of the mole rats in Africa, the mole rats in Europe, a lot of these underground rodents, is that if you find a fresh burrow, and you find a burrow, if it's fresh, you can push a little stick down through the earth and the hole is still open. If you just clear that surface covering away and open up the hole to daylight, if there's an animal around, within about 10 minutes, it will pop up to the surface and see what's going on. And then, they're very fastidious about this. It will close its front door and disappear. But it's a great way to kind of summon these animals out of the ground, to get a look and get a picture and to see what's there. So new techniques like this are also making it much easier to find some of these species. So those 3 things together, techniques, equipment, and knowledge, means more mammals. I saw my 2,000 species 3 years ago now. As Mohit said, I'm now up to 2,300, and I would never have got there without these three things happening. I used to think getting up to 1,000 species would be so hard in my lifetime, and yet now it's many people are about to get there, have got there already in this growing community of ours. And a lot of the sort of growth in mammal watching really began, I think, in India. This explosion in finding these mega species, and it began with snow leopards. They were possibly the first one of these mega mammals that I thought I would never see in my lifetime. That now, let's be honest, they're pretty easy to see in places like Hemis National Park in Ladakh, in Mongolia, in China. I remember in 2000 in Australia talking to an Australian guy who'd just done his PhD in Nepal on snow leopards. He'd been out there for 3 years and he hadn't seen one. And I was thinking, I'm never going to see this animal. It's amazing. And yet now in Ladakh, I guess it started in Hemis, the local people there have figured out how to see them. They're incredible guides. I'm sure some of you have been up there. Incredible guides who know where to look and have got the concentration to stare through those spotting scopes at the cliffs, those Himalayan cliffs, and they will find you a snow leopard if you go out. They know they're there. And this, of course, has been great for the local community. And that in turn means it's great for the snow leopards because, it's an animal that eats livestock and there's going to be some conflict. But a lot of that seems to have turned around now because of the growth in mammal watching. You can get more than 100 people in that park at the same time now up there looking at snow leopards. So that's been perhaps the first great sort of success story I can think of. But there have been many others. So here are 3 animals, kind of cool mammals, I think. Silky anteater in Costa Rica that many biologists who've spent 20, 30 years in South America have never seen. But there's one particular little boat trip you can ride in Costa Rica where they see them every day. Beautiful little anteater. On the bottom left there's a greater, lesser grism, from Argentina. It's a mustelid, it's a weasel, like a marten size. Very kind of like many of those mustelids, they're sort of widely distributed but very hard to find. But there's one park in Argentina where they're all over the place. And I guess it's because there's a lot of rodents for them to eat. They specialize perhaps in catching young viscachas and some of those things. But you go there, you can see 3 or 4 running around in a couple of hours. And perhaps the most interesting of these on the left is one of my favorites. That is a Hispaniolan solenodon, which is, it's one of the shrews. But as you know, shrews are very, very tiny animals generally. This thing is the size of a dog. It's an enormous shrew that has a venomous bite, a bite that can also kill a dog. Extraordinary, weird, strange animal. And in the Dominican Republic, they live in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and there's another species in Cuba. But in the Dominican Republic, researchers were looking for these for years, and they thought they basically thought they were extinct. They weren't seeing them on camera traps, they weren't catching them in traps, and the feeling was this animal is on the verge of extinction. But they hadn't talked to the local people, and they were in a village somewhere near the border with Haiti, and they were chatting, and this guy there goes, "They're not rare. I see them all the time when I'm out walking in the forest with my son when we go hunting." So it turns out that they're difficult to trap, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And in the dry season, if you go out with this guy and his son, in the dry season they hear them running around to the leaf litter, and it literally took us about an hour. We got to the village. The father and son walk out into the forest. Now the father is the one in charge, and he's also very sensible, and he gets his son to catch them because, as I said, these things have got a horrible venomous bite. But they hear them, they run them, they chase after them, and they catch them. And it's been great for mammal tourists, but also great for researchers who are now able to understand that this incredible species isn't as rare as we thought. So new knowledge, which often comes from talking to local people who know, obviously so much more than the scientists about many of these animals because they've grown up with them. 5 years ago, difficult to see with things like spotted bat. It's still difficult to see, to be honest. This is a beautiful bat from North America. But because of the interest in mammal watching now, the bat research occasionally run trips to catch these. They want to catch them anyway, but they're funded now by mammal watchers. So if you're really keen, you can pay to go on one of these trips for a few days in Arizona. This one we caught on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. So spectacular bat with spectacular scenery. The eye in Madagascar, one of my favorite animals, this incredible primate that again was thought to be extremely rare in Madagascar, but it turns out they're just difficult to see, and they're not all that rare, despite often being persecuted by the locals who are deeply suspicious of them because they look like witches. A really strange animal. But there are places like Daraina Reserve, a community reserve in Madagascar now, where they will find them for you on the first night you're there. And they're just a beautiful animal. And you don't just get a glimpse. When these things emerge from their nest, they will spend about an hour fastidiously grooming themselves, going through their fur with that long middle finger of theirs, taking out all the fleas and ticks. And you just get this incredible show for an hour watching them. Naked mole rat, another really, really bizarre animal. I thought it was hard to see, but it turns out if you find a colony and you wait, and as we did last month, we were doing this in Ethiopia, you will see at the right time of day their earth from their mounds flying into the air, like little volcanoes of soil, and you creep up to the hole and you stare down, and you will get to see one of these bizarre animals. Look them up. They're so interesting. They don't get cancer. They can withstand incredible fluctuations in temperature, very low levels of oxygen, and they live. Some of you will know they live in colonies, like bees. There's a queen who has all the young. There are workers. Just an extraordinary animal, a eusocial animal. It describes the way they cooperate together. So a lot's changed, in the last 10, 15 years about some of these great species we can now see. So the question is, of course, what's coming next? Here are 3 things that I predict will appear in the next 5 years. In the middle, Sumatran striped rabbit is absolutely spectacular bunny. But it already turns out there seems to be a spot in Sumatra, a particular trail in Gunung Kerinci where they're seeing these quite often. So I have a hot date in October or September to go and look for those. Tufted ground squirrel, another species from Asia. This is from Borneo. Just a spectacular squirrel. Look at that tail. And literally a week ago, I got a message from my buddy, one of my buddies in Borneo, and one of his buddies has been seeing one come to a bird table. So if that continues, I am going to be on the next plane to Borneo, I think, because that one is one of my most wanted. On the left, this one I'm not so sure about, but I'm really, really hoping, is a little bush dog from South America. They're small, they run around in packs, they're extremely cute, but they're also extremely vicious. They're distributed from Costa Rica all the way down to Argentina, but they're extremely hard to see because they're constantly on the move. And I think now really anywhere where they come into contact with people, they are dying because they're mixing with village dogs and getting distemper. So you've got to be in kind of deep into the forest to have a chance. But I would love to see one of those. And I'm hoping somewhere, maybe someone on this call will find a spot for those in South America. So that's where it's going, I hope. So this is my argument about why we are in the golden age of mammal watching, where there's never been and never will be, unfortunately, a better time to see mammals than now. And that's a golden mouse, by the way. But another golden animal here to say this is a golden langur from Bhutan. This is also the golden age of adventure, because mammal watching is in some ways where bird watching might have been maybe 100 years ago. It's very difficult now to go out and discover a new species of bird or make any kind of major breakthrough. But for mammals, it's still, really quite easy to discover new species. I've, stumbled upon several by accident, and we keep, major range extensions, new country records, and species that have been lost for thousands of years or never even been recorded. We find them on these trips simply because no one has really been to these places and looking. So it's also the golden age of adventure. And talk a little bit now about a trip some of us did, including Charles Foley. I see his wife Lara is on the call. Hi, Lara. To West Papua, and this was almost 2 years ago now. West Papua is on the left here. We were just up in this top area, the Bird's Head Peninsula. You can see why it's called that. What used to be Irian Jaya. And we went there to look for mammals. Now, coming from Australia, like me, we'd hear about Papua New Guinea or New Guinea. You'd hear from bird watchers who went over there, but the story was always there's no mammals. We never see any mammals. Some great birds of paradise, but just mammals are really hard to see. They've all been eaten. You never see them. And so I believed that for a very long time until I met this guy here on the left-hand side walking down the trail with the camera over his shoulder. He's Carlos Bocos, a friend of mine. He's an incredibly good bird guide, incredibly good naturalist. And he'd spent several years living in Indonesia, running bird tours for companies like Bird Tour Asia. But he really got interested in mammals, particularly during COVID when the birding stopped. And he started discovering, because he got a heat scope, that there's actually a lot of mammals to see. They're just in different places to where the birders go. And you need to go out at night, obviously, to see them. So he started saying, let's do this trip to West Papua. I reckon we're going to really see some amazing mammals. So Charles Foley, myself, a couple of other friends went over there in May 2023, and we had an amazing time. We were there for just over 2 weeks. We saw incredibly beautiful, rare, diverse, little-known species. This is a feather-tailed possum, absolutely gorgeous. This is a common cuscus, which you get in Australia, but I don't think I'd ever seen this species there. There's a ringtail possum, another marsupial, R-fat ringtail. This is one of the 2 tree kangaroo species we saw, Volgocrops tree kangaroo. So we weren't just getting glimpses of these animals, which we thought, had been hunted to extinction. We were getting great looks at them just sitting in trees like this one, like a teddy bear. We got a second species of tree kangaroo there, grizzled tree kangaroo. This was all in the first 4 nights. And it wasn't just the big stuff. We got, getting the mice, like this is a tree mouse, Pogonomes, tree mouse, just a giant white-tailed rat. This is a Laurensomes, a long-tailed mouse, a hopping mouse, but I think almost certainly a new species to science. They've never been recorded from that part of Papua, and it seems very likely this is a brand new species. So someone needs to go over there and study these things and figure that out. We're also looking at bats. There's a little Mosier sheath-tailed bats that like to live in these little family clusters. This is a tube-nosed bat, absolutely beautiful animal that, just hanging there. This was a woolly bat. I think it's a Fly River woolly bat. I think I'm right. This may have been the first record for Indonesia. It was certainly the first iNaturalist record. That was high up in a tree, hanging from a twig at night. Never have seen that one without a heat scope. So, another victory for the thermal scope. So in that just over 2-week trip, we saw 59 species of mammals. And given most birding groups to Papua maybe see 2 species, you can see what a difference it makes when you go out at the right times into different places looking for these things. So a real adventure, but also a real success story for conservation. And I'll talk about that now, because this is what I'm now more and more excited about, is the potential for this growing hobby to really make a difference for conservation at a very local, very scattered, very grassroots, very organic level. But the Papua story is my favorite example of this. So there are several stories now, snow leopards is one, of where mammal watching and mammal tourism has been a game changer for species. And apart from snow leopards, the jaguars in the Pantanal are a famous story. 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, it was extremely hard to see a jaguar in the wild. Charles Foley, my mammal watching best friend, talks about a National Geographic photographer who went out for, I think it was a year on assignment to Brazil looking for jaguars, and he got one picture of an animal running away. Now you can go to the Pantanal, you can leave your lodge before breakfast, and you will see one before lunchtime. So they've changed the game because they've discovered there was a particular river in the Pantanal where you could see jaguars, and people started coming and people started paying. And now the local ranchers who once saw this animal as a vermin, as something that ate their cattle, they are now realizing they can make much more money from jaguar tourism than they can from cattle. And the price of losing the occasional cow compared to the cost they're getting from tourists coming in and paying hundreds of dollars to stay with them and see jaguars completely changed. The jaguars now, they're certainly more visible. They seem to be doing better. They're more protected than they ever were. So that's been a success story. But it's one thing to talk about snow leopards and jaguars, large, charismatic, beautiful animals. But the Papua story is slightly different. One of the animals we all really wanted to see was a pretty obscure one. It was a long-beaked, western long-beaked echidna. Now, the echidnas are one of the few monotreme animals. They're the animals that lay eggs. They're in Australasia only. The platypus is the other one that you will know. But in Australia, there's a short-beaked echidna. It's like a kind of hedgehoggy thing. Looks like a hedgehog a little bit, but it eats ants and it lays eggs. It's a really strange animal. They're not uncommon in Australia. And if they can get rid of the foxes and cats, they're really quite common. In West Papua, or in the island of New Guinea, there are 3 other species of echidna, all of them called long-beaked, and they're all huge compared to the short-beaked echidna. They must be 4 times the size. All of them are extremely rare. I'd never heard of anyone seeing one. But Carlos here, the guide we talked about, he'd heard rumors that they were still around. According to the IUCN, the last record of a western long-beaked echidna scientific record was in 1989, critically endangered. But Carlos had heard from his local friends in West Papua. No, there are places where they'd see these in the forest fairly often. So we decided, look, we really have to see this animal. And Carlos sent out his team of friends to really talk to all these remote villages. And he found a little village called Klalik, which was only a couple of hours from the nearest airport. So not all that remote, but basically no one had ever been there. I think we were certainly the first group of Europeans to visit this village. We met with, and we're having a welcome ceremony for us here. We may have been the first group of anyone from outside the local area. It wasn't even on Google Maps. There was no record of this place at all. So we went there, met the villagers. They put us up in a little house in the village, and they said, we're going to go out tonight and we're going to look for this echidna. And basically every man and every boy came out with us that evening. There was a lot of excitement, probably 30 or 40 people running ahead of us with flashlights in the forest, trying to find this animal. And, just before midnight, we were getting pretty tired and we thought we're not going to see it. And then the cry went up They'd found it up a hill across a small stream. So we all charge over there, sprinting as much as we can sprint at my age. And there it was, this extraordinary animal with its head stuck in the soil looking for worms and hiding. And that's their defense. They're too slow to run away. This is basically like a 10-pound cheeseburger for the locals. It's a large, piece of protein. I imagine it's quite good to eat, especially if you haven't got much other choice. But they're defenseless. They just sit there and they hide like this. And of course, that's no defense at all. So we had this, just a fabulous encounter with this animal that, according to the IUCN, hadn't been seen since 1989. Just wonderful. One of my all-time favorite animals to see. Now, the story doesn't end there, because when I got home, I put the video up straight away, of course, on Instagram, and it had about 5,000 views, which is a lot for one of my videos in the first couple of days. And then the trip report I put out when we got home on mammalwatching.com, that got a lot of attention. And fast forward by a year, and over 100 people had visited that village. I don't know what the numbers are now, but the German ambassador to Jakarta went there. It became something on the ecotourism circuit. A lot of birders visit West Papua for the birds of paradise. They were adding on side trips to this village because, as I said, it's quite accessible. Most of them were seeing the echidna. And as a result, the villagers have started now selling T-shirts with the echidna on. They've built a new guest house. They've stopped all hunting in the forest, as I understand it. They've got chickens instead now. They've got the money to keep chickens. They're talking about building a fish farm. It's completely changed the conservation of that patch of forest, which is a really big deal. And it's a story that I'm just so happy to hear this has happened. It's nothing, there's been no requirement for a big development project to go in there, no need to create a national park or change legislation. It's all been done at a local level by the community themselves who run this and manage this. And I think it's an inspiration to what could happen elsewhere. Imagine that happening in 1,000 other places with 1,000 other species. Imagine the difference that could make for conservation in countries like Indonesia. So extremely exciting. So it happens for these big cats. It happens for prickly egg-laying echidnas. Could it happen for other mammals like a rat? Well, it can, and it has. And this is admittedly quite a spectacular rat, but this is a maned rat from Kenya. Now, I got a much better picture actually last month of this species in Djibouti. But 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Kenya. I really wanted to see this animal. And I think, again, it was Charles Foley, who I've talked about, who gave me tips that he'd heard there was a particular lodge near Mount Kenya where they see these occasionally. So I went there with my kids for a night, and lo and behold, I found one of these at about 2 o'clock in the morning, wandering around, got some pictures. This is a really cool rat. It's about the size of a small cat, spectacularly colored. And the most interesting thing about it is they actually have toxic fur, because they have learned that to chew the bark of poisonous vegetation, like the poison arrow tree, and then they lick themselves with the saliva, and their saliva is now poisonous. They cover their fur in this toxic shield, and that protects them. There's enough poison on that fur to kill an elephant, someone told me. So hence the kind of bright colors, the black and white, the classic warning I'm poisonous symbol. So a fascinating species, a really gorgeous one. And as a result of that trip report, Charles Foley and I did an article for one of the Kenya Airways in-flight magazines about this animal, the lodge in Mount Kenya called Trout Tree Lodge. Now has a maned rat guy. Here's a picture there. His job is to show tourists the maned rat. He knows where the holes are. He takes them out at night, and he will show them the rats. So it can work for big cats. It can work for rats. I'm sure it will work for bats as well. So there is potential, I think, here for so many of these species with limited populations left, limited distributions, to start protecting pieces of their habitat through this well-managed ecotourism. Of course, there are dangers that come with ecotourism. We've seen that on the birding side for sure, with too many people arriving, with people playing tapes, with people harassing animals away from nests and so on. So we need to be careful, but at the moment it's still niche enough that those problems aren't happening with mammal watching. And so I think it's, we may do a little bit of harm, but these trips do a lot more good than harm. So it's taken off and people are talking about it more. This was the article a friend of mine wrote for the New York Times. He's a journalist there. He's not a travel journalist or a wildlife journalist. He's a housing journalist, but he went to Borneo with his dad last year on a sort of father-son trip, and he wrote a really lovely article about the time they had. But then he also talks about the wider mammal watching movement and the way it's changing and opening up. So that was a great plug for the mammal watching community. And that's it. I'll finish here with a picture of one of my favorite Indian animals, a nilgiri tar. I guess that's also a species that's been protected by tourism. I know they're very, very endangered, but I also know a lot of people go to see them in that park down south. So thank you very much for listening. I hope some of you are inspired to go out and look for a few more mammals. Please check out the website. Look at the trips. People, think about sending me trip reports from wherever you live, and also, think about the potential of this for conservation. So if you know a village or a forest or somewhere where there's some interesting animals that might be ones that people, like me would pay to see, please let us know, because, we'll get a trip, we'll visit, and maybe more people will follow. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you, John. That was a real eye-opener. I think it was a brilliant presentation by you, and it also goes to show how these species can change the entire village or the community lifestyle, and how it can sort of put them into the mainstream conservation work. This afternoon, when I was talking to someone from North Bengal, and they were really concerned about, there was a professor from a university who was really concerned about elephant conservation, and he had a friend who was working on elephant corridors for the last 15 years. I told them, I said, you need to understand that conservation needs to be turned into business for self-sustenance. You need to look at ecotourism. So when I started to talk to him about tourism, his eyes opened up. He says, well, that's something that we've never considered. We've always sort of wondered what government has to do to protect elephants. I said, unless you look at coexistence, unless you look at communities coming there to protect these species, you can't expect a handful of government officials or a machinery to conserve these areas. The first thing will be that, or leave these animals alone, but things like elephants and lions and various other nomadic species will never sort of get confined to one habitat. So it's important to ensure their rite of passage. We need to have these corridors or these communities get involved with financial gains, and then have operators like us take people there so that they can pay for their survival. And this is, once the stomachs are full, then they start thinking differently. Then it's not about only crop grading or other things. I think it's a wonderful case study that you put across, John. And there are some questions that people are asking. Selvam is asking, where can hyena be seen in India, or a country where hyena watching is best? John, for you to answer. You're on mute.
Sorry. I just answered that one on the chat, actually. Selvam Kumar. Velavadar is really good. Is that the Black Buck Sanctuary for striped hyena? I saw mine there. But they're not uncommon in sort of places like Tanzania, I think, and areas of Tanzania. Chad, if you can get there, is an amazing country. It's really good for striped hyena. They're widespread and they're beautiful, but they're really quite hard to find. But you would know better than me, Mohit, on striped hyena, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at Gate Birding Lodge, which is right adjacent to Gir National Park, last year we had one hyena sleeping right next to the reception. So when people went for a safari early morning, this guy was running on the driveway. So
Fantastic.
Yeah, hyenas are quiet, but middle of the night when you go to these habitats where they, or the places like, for example, Ranthambore, where they put a lot of carcass in one dump, you invariably get to see it. So if you're
All
not
right.
going, yeah, it's invariably there. I think there are 2 or 3 around there which hang, the other foxes. Well, last time we had a very interesting sighting of rusty spotted cat right there. So it was a good sighting. If you have any other questions, anyway, if people don't have too many questions here, I've already shared the link with you, of John's website. You with them directly, and you can actually choose to see these hundreds of reports which have been put there. And thank you, John, for helping me every time I've asked you for something or the other, to put it on a website or showcase. And I'm really, really grateful you've done that. Nishant, please, Nishant is a friend here who writes very well. And if you can do a review for his website, that'll be very useful in the Indian, nature enthusiast lobby. It'll be very interesting to put this across. And we're going to do a little report as well. Yeah. So
fantastic. Yeah, please, Nishant. That would be great.
Right. Keep us updated all the time, John, whatever else that you see, so we can then sort of keep listing it. And friends, you're most welcome to attend Global Wildlife Fair. I'll send you more information as we go along. Thank you, John. Thank you, my team. Thank you, Gaurav, the team that's working behind the scenes to make these happen. And thank you, friends, for being here today to listen to John. And this webinar will be on YouTube. You'll all get a replay link in the morning anyways, which you can share with your friends and family. And once the link is uploaded on YouTube and also on mammalwatching.com, I'll let you know.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mohit. Thank you, Gaurav. Thanks for having me. And thank everyone for
joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, thanks.